The Jacksonville Jaguars, their offseason in 60 seconds. Hired Ryan Nielsen as their defensive coordinator. Signed Trevor Lawrence to a 5-year, $275 million extension with $200 million guaranteed. No big deal. Josh Hines-Allen comes back on a 4-year, $140 million deal with $90 guaranteed about. Tyson Campbell, 4 years, $76.5 million with $53 guaranteed. Foye Oluokun restructures his contract. They retain Ezra Cleveland after trading for him in the middle of last year. In free agency, Eric Armstead, 3 years, $43 million. Gabe Davis, 3 years, $39 million. Darnell Savage, 3 years, $21 million. Mitch Morse comes in on a 2-year, $10 million deal after getting cut by the Bills. Also some smaller pieces. Ronald Darby comes over, who's probably going to be a starting corner for this team as it currently stands. And then they traded for Mac Jones to be their backup quarterback, which I actually think is like kind of a savvy move.
It's a savvy move, but it's kind of funny to add on it. I don't know why. It's just, after all that's happened with him over the past 2 years, it's just funny.
It's not a bad backup quarterback to have,
really
considering
not.
like how we've seen him play in the NFL. If you put him in like half decent situation and like spend 10 minutes just being like, yeah, we think you're pretty good. Just like do some confidence rehabilitation and then drop him into a somewhat competent NFL offense. There are worse things that you can do at backup quarterback. Lost Calvin Ridley in free agency. Darius Williams goes to the Rams. Rayshon Jenkins to the Seahawks. Foley Fatukasi to the Texans. Draft picks drafted Brian Thomas Jr. in the first round, 23rd overall. Defensive tackle Mason Smith in the third round. Cornerback Jerrion Jones in the third round. Mason Smith in the second round, I'm sorry. Jerrion Jones in the third round. Blue chip check-in for the Jacksonville Jaguars. What do you got?
I've got two. One is the quarterback. They paid him a lot of money, and I think he's a very good player. And then Josh Hines-Allen, who had, I mean, he's been like kind of an ascending player a little bit for a while, but really hit that stride, it felt like last year.
I have one, and it's Josh Hines-Allen. I can't. I think Trevor Lawrence is a very, very good player. I think that saying Trevor Lawrence is a blue chip player right now, based on the way the last couple of years has gone, you're going to drive people insane if you just pencil him in here for this.
I could do one better if do you want me to go there?
This is all you, man. This is half your show. You do whatever the fuck you want.
I still think today he's better than CJ Stroud. And that's not to say anything bad against CJ Stroud. CJ's an incredible player. I just think we just forget how good this guy actually is when he's throwing to competent people.
All right, we'll get there here in a second. I do not think that you could just pencil him in here, even if I do think that Trevor Lawrence is a very good underrated quarterback. Red chip guys, I think Trevor Lawrence is definitively in there. Tyson Campbell I would throw in there. I think Tyson Campbell's really good when he's healthy. Mitch Morse is still a solid center when he's on the field, and I think Brandon Scherff is probably there too. Like those guys are aging, but those are component pieces of like decent NFL offenses. If you have competent guys at those other offensive line spots, those are probably the guys I would say. What significant question marks does this team have in your mind, depth chart wise?
Speaking of Trevor Lawrence, are they going to protect him this year? Because I think, on the right side, I kind of like what they did with Anton Harrison. Everything else is still a bit of a question mark to me.
Yeah, I mean, the left side with Cam Robinson's been banged up, and I think that's part of the problem is they've struggled to stay healthy. If he can be on the field consistently, you'd hope that's okay. But, Cleveland's just kind of a guy. He was available for like a 6th-round pick in the middle of last season, and you hope that Morse can just be a stabilizing force that kind of lifts everything else up. They obviously had Luke Fortner there, who was the 3rd-round rookie, and, he had his ups and downs over the first couple of years of his career. So you drop a veteran into that center spot, and you would just hope that combined with like a step forward from Harrison gets you to a workable place overall.
I would sure hope so.
Secondary and edge depth, I would also say, are question marks. Like you get outside of Hines-Allen and Trayvon Walker, and even like Trayvon Walker is not a fully realized product yet. And then the secondary overall, it's like Ronald Darby played 40% of the snaps for the Ravens last year. He's a day one starting corner for you. Like that's something to pay attention to. I think he's a day one starting corner. You look at the depth chart, like I think he is penciled in to start. So
I'd be more concerned if he wasn't, I think. So,
right, fair. So yeah. I that's based on what I've seen. Again, we don't have a Jags writer, so I'm trying to piece together. John Shipley does a very good job when I was reading his work, but it's a little bit different than when we have somebody covering the team in the way that we cover the team here at The Athletic. What are you watching the first month of the season with these Jaguars?
I just kind of want to see how fast this defense can get off the ground with Ryan Nielsen. Ryan Nielsen did an awesome job with the Atlanta Falcons defense last year. That was talent-wise, not a good unit at all, really. They had obviously a couple good players with Bates and Terrell, but that front didn't really have a lot of guys, and they got more out of it than they probably should have. So I just kind of love what he has going on as a play caller. I thought he did some really interesting stuff out of, 2 high shells. I think we talked about that on a different show with the Falcons. So I just want to see how fast he can get this thing off the ground, because the defensive line is talented. The cornerback room, if Tyson Campbell is really playing up to his level, I think could be really good. The safeties are actually really good and really versatile, which I kind of like. So, and the linebackers are not great, but Foye at least gets you to like competent, which is a good spot to be. So I don't know. I think they have enough that he could get this off the ground quickly, and I kind of just want to see it.
Yeah, I mean, you look at some of the stuff that they did last year, like the coverage menu is like all over the place in a good way, hard to get a beat on them. And I just think that they have enough talent on that defense to be pretty good from day one, especially up front. Like you drop Eric Armstead in as like an interior rusher with those other two guys, like, and just the amount of size and physicality that that group is going to bring to the table, which when you consider Ryan Nielsen's background, it's the least surprising thing ever.
I was
The
going to
man
say,
was a
you
defensive
joked about
coordinator
this.
for 1 year. And they signed Calais Campbell, they signed Bud Dupree, and they drafted 275-pound Zach Harrison in the 3rd round. Like, this man has a type.
Exactly. He walked into Jacksonville and went, okay, Josh Hines Allen. Yeah, okay. He's got length. That's cool. Trayvon Walker. Okay. Obviously really long and athletic. I need another one, though. Like, this needs more.
I need a 6'6" interior player for this all to come together and enter Eric Armstead into the equation. So if he can lift that group, because I think there's still questions about some areas of the secondary and again, some of the depth at some of these spots, but if Ryan Nielsen can prove again to be one of those guys who was a multiplier as a coordinator, I think that you could be pretty optimistic and feel pretty good about where this group can go early on. What I'm watching is, can this team pull out of its offensive tailspin that they were in last year? I mean, you just look at it. It was the most frustrating offense in the NFL. I think that's fair for me to say. They were 12th in dropback success rate last season. 12th. Ahead of CJ Stroud, Trevor Lawrence was in dropback success rate last year. Okay.
Curious.
And then you look at it, and there's so many other just disgusting aspects to this offense. There's so many. They lost more EPA than any team in the league on like wide receiver and tight end screens. They lost so many on fumbles, and part of that is the quarterback, which we will discuss in a second. So there's so many aspects of this where they're just shooting themselves in the foot over and over and over again. 12th in dropback success rate, dead last in the NFL in the amount of their red zone drives that led to points. 75% of their red zone drives led to points. So that meant 1 out of every 4 times they were in the red zone. Not that they didn't score a touchdown. They did not score, period. That was dead last in the league. There was only one other team below 80%. This team is built to drive me insane.
Do you have the other team by chance? It's going to be some other actually awful team, and it's going to
the
disgust
Giants.
Me. Yeah. Oh, Jesus.
It was the Giants. I didn't write it down, but I did make a note of it because I was just curious about who else was in that general
That's
range.
something you remember. That's something you remember.
So now the question becomes, how do we get more efficiency in other areas of this? Because they were awful running the ball last year. Like they were so bad running the ball. And I think that was one of the biggest problems they had on offense. So I think the solutions to this is going to be leaning into a little bit more outside zone as their primary run, because they just tried to run a little bit of everything last year and they never really figured out what they were good at. This team had 287 gun runs last season, which was the 7th most in the NFL. They were 29th in the NFL in EPA per carries on those runs. They were 32nd in the percentage of those runs that went for 0 or negative yardage. So they lost more value on those runs than just about any other team in the league. So I think trying to eject some of that and play a little bit more under center and just this is what we're going to work on. This is what we're going to focus on. I think that can benefit the run game. And the other thing this benefits is the passing game, because I think that one of the things they're going to try to do to just hone their offensive identity and seek out more explosives, and we've already seen it in the preseason, I think we're going to see a lot more play action from this team, especially under center. And for multiple different reasons, I actually think that is a very smart path forward for them.
I think it is a very smart path forward because last year, like you said, a ton of gun runs. And I don't know. I think when you were in the gun so much as they were as an offense, like they were just in the gun overall a lot. And then when a lot of your runs are coming from there, it just feels like it just didn't make any sense for this offense. Like I just didn't really like it. And then your 2 running backs, they're good at some things, especially Travis Etienne, very explosive player. He's good at catching the ball out of the backfield. Vision is not necessarily his strong suit. So when you're asking him to read out a ton of things, and especially with this like cramped and weird as some gun runs can get with the path of the back as opposed to being under center, it just didn't feel like it made a whole lot of sense. So I would hope that them simplifying things and getting under center a little bit more, simplifying it schematically by being more of a zone team, I would hope that helps get everybody where they need to be.
The reason I like the play action part of this, and you and I have talked about this a little bit, my frustration with Trevor is not the decisions that he's making. I actually think the decisions that he's making are right most of the time. He's actually too quick to make correct decisions too often. And I think some of that is driven by the fact that he hasn't had a lot of faith in the protection for the last 2 years that he's been in the NFL. So if number 1 in the progression is open, even if it's a modestly good play, I'm going to take it consistently. It's hard to tell your quarterback not to do that. So I think trying to build an offense that forces him to be a little bit more aggressive and a little bit looser, that's what I want to see. And I think more play action does that. If you look at the numbers, 35% of his throws off under center play action the past 2 years have gone 15 plus yards in the air. That is the 5th highest mark in the entire league. So when he's working off of under center play action, you're getting him on the move. He's a very aggressive player. Overall, he is 18th in that metric in terms of the percentage of his throws that go 15 or more yards. So I think getting him to a place where he's a little bit less robotic in the pocket, you're encouraging him to get on the move, play looser, play a little bit freer. That's the Trevor Lawrence I want to see. And the guy that we saw in the preseason, I know it's the preseason, that's the player I'm looking for, because I think that has a chance to unlock some of those things that I occasionally find frustrating about him.
That's spot on because to me, it feels like quarterbacks, when the team is bad around them, will fall into two different categories. You'll have the guys who just feel like the weight is on their shoulders and they're just going to do every single thing and they're going to go crazy mode. They're going to break the pocket early. They're going to just do whatever the hell they can to get yards. And then you're going to have guys that are going to take the simplest answer to get 4 yards at a time. Like, let's just somehow keep this thing on schedule. Trevor Lawrence falls into that. We've talked about this. Justin Herbert falls into that. Like, you can be a good
My
quarterback.
same frustration with both of those guys. Like, that's the reason.
Right. You can be a good quarterback and default into that. I think my thing is the guys who, when everything around them is bad and they start to do the crazy stuff, it's almost feels like you can justify it more, right? You're like, oh well, yeah, the team is bad. He's got to go do stuff. Whereas watching these guys go 4 yard at a time feels bad and wrong. But to me, it's kind of just like two sides of the same coin.
So here's where I'm at with Trevor, though. And this is why, even if I really like him and I think that the discourse around him is insane. Here's what is the most frustrating to me. And here's why I would have him down below a guy like Stroud and some of these other guys that I'm really excited about. One, I do think that lack of aggressiveness in some of these moments is frustrating. And I'm never going to worry about that with a guy like CJ Stroud. Two, he does some of that, like, I'm going to become more and more insular and more, it's going to feel tighter and tighter and tighter while also making bad plays. If you're going to live that way and never turn the ball over, that's fine. That's how Justin Herbert is. But if you're going to live that way and have like 2 whoopsie daisy fumbles like every other game, that's what gets a little bit frustrating to me. Like, you can't do that while also just like getting dink and dunk stuff consistently.
Okay, I think that's kind of fair. Again, I think that that's been more of a problem with the people around him. And my thing is, so I can't defend the fumbles. The fumbles are that's just he's built kind of skinny. He does some weird stuff with ball handling. He's going to do that. I fully admit that one. A lot of his interceptions, though, it's not him making a wrong
It's
decision.
fumbles to me. It's
Yeah.
to me, it's the fumbles. The interceptions, I'm like, that's whatever. Like, the interceptions are fine. Like, continue to be aggressive. I don't mind that you're going to throw the ball to the other team every once in a while. It's the fumbles. Like, it's putting the ball on the ground as often as he does.
It's almost, you know who we had to live with for a long time with this too? Lamar Jackson. And obviously he's a very different player and gives you some other stuff that Trevor doesn't. But like there was a long stretch of Lamar's career where it was like, dude, he just cannot stop putting the ball on the ground. And Trevor needs to get to wherever that point Lamar got of not doing that anymore.
I want to be clear about this before we move on. I really like Trevor Lawrence, and I think that Trevor Lawrence is a very good player. All I'm trying to do is articulate where I think some of the gaps are and where I think some of my frustrations with him lie, because I think a lot of other people have those frustrations and they're looking at the conversation around Trevor Lawrence between a lot of people in NFL media who are ready to just pencil him in as a blue chip player or one of the best quarterbacks in the league. And they're like, I don't understand this. Can you please explain this to me? And so I'm trying to just dig like 1-2 layers deeper into why there's a little bit of cognitive dissonance with this quarterback specifically and the way that he is talked about on the internet.
And I think it's good because the thing is, I realize I might be the unreasonable one here, but the heart wants what the heart wants, and the heart wants a quarterback who plays like Trevor Lawrence.
It's funny to me because I find myself railing against two different populi when it comes to Trevor Lawrence. Like, there's the meathead people on the internet who think Trevor Lawrence sucks, and then there's the people like you. And I'm trying to find a reasonable middle ground between those two places, even if I probably and definitively drift further toward your side of this argument.
Exactly. I'm just all the way jumped in. I'm all the way in the pool. You're like, you're in the pool, but not head deep the way I am.
Part of the frustration is that I know it's there. Part of the frustration is that the best version of this guy is so fucking good. And that's why, like, even those little flashes in that preseason game, I'm like, yes, like, this is it. I think he has a chance to be like a truly elite, like top 7 or top 8 guy that is one of the difference making players in the league. It's just about closing the gaps that still exist and putting just enough around him to get him to that place. What is keeping you up at night with this Jacksonville Jaguars team? I feel like that entire like 20 minutes was just angst filled. So we probably could slot that in if we wanted to.
Yeah, I think that probably did a pretty good job there. My thing is, we talked a little bit about how in theory, them getting under center more could help the run game. In theory, them going into a more of a zone running game could help them a little bit. Maybe some of the upgrades they've made at the offensive line, mainly Mitch Morse, could help them a little bit. I still just have a really hard time buying that the run game is actually going to be any better, because I think Mitch Morse, even if he's an upgrade, is on probably the back end of his career now. It's getting close to the end
You're
here.
allowed to say that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm allowed to say. I'm trying to be nice, but he's been a good player for a long time. Ezra Cleveland to me is, listen, man. What did we say about the Vikings? This was a team that did not have guards, and they traded Ezra Cleveland away. That's not great. That's not a great way to go get your starting left guard.
The team that's trotting out Blake Brandel this year, who's a 6th-round pick in 2020 and hasn't really played. The fact that they didn't want Ezra Cleveland is probably a signal.
Yeah, speaks a lot to me, at least. And then, Brandon Scherf, I think is nice, but probably not quite as good as the player that they were hoping they played. And then Cam Robinson has just been banged up a ton. So the offensive line just has a ton of questions marks to me. And then, like I was saying with Travis Etienne, if you can get him into space one way or the other, he can be a really explosive, dangerous player for you. Getting him there, vision and decision making wise, is a roller coaster. And I just wonder if the offensive line isn't good enough. Like, is that actually going to fix itself? Because you mentioned this was a team that got, a lot of their runs went for 0 or negative yards. That is partly an offensive line thing. That is also partly a Travis Etienne thing. And he's still going to be the starting running back there. So I just have a ton of questions about whether this run game is actually going to be any better.
Do you have any faith? Do you have any like positive spin or like?
I mean, it can't be worse. That would be my spin.
The 2024 Jacksonville Jaguars. It can't be worse.
Not my most enthusiastic I'll be on this show about this team, but that's kind of where I land there.
What's keeping me up at night? Again, one of them is just the offense not doing the things that we just discussed. Like, that's keeping me up at night. But the other thing I'll say is just the secondary. I mean, again, Ronald Darby was a 40% player for the Ravens last year. Darnell Savage has played 300 combined snaps in the slot the past 2 seasons. You can make an argument that that's actually the position he should have been playing. And one of the reasons that he struggled is because he wasn't doing that enough. But I still think there are enough question marks about those 2 guys specifically and what they'll do this year, that if the secondary is lacking, wanting a little bit below average, the front doesn't necessarily come together because you don't have the depth in some of those spots. Does this defense hover somewhere around like the 18th to 20th best unit in the league rather than like the 10th to 12th best unit in the league, which I think there are some outcomes where they get up that high.
I think that's totally fair. Campbell, like you said, we can pencil him in as being pretty good if he can stay on the field and stuff. And then, but you're just betting on a lot with the other 2 corner spots. And kind of like you said with Savage, you're kind of betting on what you said with Jalen Petrie, where it's like, okay, this guy was technically a safety, but he's always been better when he can just move forward and go at people. So let's just let him do that. So we'll see if it works out, him, being able to play here full time.
What are you most excited about watching with this year's Jaguars team?
Trevor has some big people to throw to now, which is a stark change from what we had last year. Because even if, Calvin Ridley, he's not short. I think he's like 6 foot flat, very thin, like just a rail thin receiver, just not a guy who was built to make contested
doesn't
catches.
Play big. Like he's just not a guy who plays big. And that's not even like an indictment. It's just like his play style.
That's just what he is. Exactly. He's good at a lot of other things, but that's just not what he is. Like Zay Jones is really just not that type of player.
Some of the shit that you have said during this conversation is just incredible. It couldn't be worse. He's good at other things. Like this team it's impossible to have a normal conversation about this team.
Yeah, I know, but that's always been the Jaguars. I think this is very fitting for this section. But then Christian Kirk, he is good at a lot of things. Not a guy who plays big, and not a guy who plays outside. So this was just even Evan Ingram. He is probably like of the quality tight ends, the guy who plays the smallest. Like he's almost more of a slot yak receiver, really, for you. So Trevor really didn't have big guys to throw to. But I think what Trevor actually does best, like his best throws, are in that 12 to 20 range where he can throw it into a tight window and be like, all right, my guy's going to go get it. And I know I made the right throw. Okay, well, now you have Brian Thomas Jr., who I think if he's actually come along really well in camp, John Shipley, who you mentioned earlier, talking to him, he was like, dude, Brian Thomas does not look good early in camp. And then as it's gone on, he's been like, it does not seem like it's the same player. Like he looks incredible now. So I'm excited for that. And then Gabe Davis doesn't actually play as big as he is, but he still, I think, gets you over the line compared to what they were throwing to last year. So I'm just excited to see what it looks like.
My answer is Brian Thomas. So we could talk about this and just like how the receivers come together. I really liked him in college. I know that his game definitely has some warts. Like he's not that physical of a player. He does a lot of like slithering around people, which talking to some people who are evaluating him, they construing that as a negative, just like that he doesn't have a lot of physicality. I think how like slithery he is and just how hard to get a hold of he is actually a really good thing when you combine that with how explosive he is. But again, like there are certain holes in his game. There's a reason that he was picked in the 20s and not the top half of the first round sort of guy, despite the production that he had. I think his skill set with Gabe Davis and with Christian Kirk, I actually really like that because what I wouldn't want from Brian Thomas is for a guy with that frame to just be popped outside the numbers and be a vertical X from day one in this offense. That's the whole point of going out and getting Gabe Davis, is because when they signed Gabe Davis, the hope was they would bring back Calvin Ridley, and then he could be more of your like big crosser, like Z sort of player that he wasn't allowed to be last year because Zay Jones was consistently hurt. So I think the same sort of ideas apply to Brian Thomas. And that big crosser he caught in the preseason, that's what I want to see from him. I want to see his speed weaponized, not just vertically, but also with some of the horizontal things that he could potentially do. And so you combine that with Gabe Davis as like your vertical X presence and Christian Kirk as your slot guy. I really like that. But if that's the case, and you're an 11, Evan Ingram probably has to be on the field. So can you run the ball with that configuration?
No, probably not. That's my concern.
So that's my issue here. And if they're in 12, do they take Brian Thomas off the field and it's Christian Kirk and Gabe Davis, and then you put Luke Farrell on there? It's like, okay, we can run the ball a little bit better here, but are you scared of the pass catching options here? And does this feel less dynamic? So how they sort through that to find their best 11 that allows them to run the ball and throw the ball, that to me is like one of my bigger concerns and questions I have, because it's just hard for me to imagine the ceiling case for this offense that doesn't involve a healthy dose of Brian Thomas involved in that.
I think that's a totally fair concern. I think my spin on that is last year they didn't even have options in that regard. They were all small dudes, and it was going to be a finesse
fair.
offense no matter what. At least now they've got some optionality. Is it perfect? Probably not, but at least they have some options.
Most important supporting character on this team for 2024 is?
Mentioned them both already. Ronald Darby. If he can give you functional play on the outside opposite Tyson Campbell, that's going to be absolutely huge. And then Gabe Davis, it's not even that Gabe Davis needs to be great. It's just kind of like what we talked about, where last year so much of the passing core was the same guy. It was a bunch of slot guys or smaller guys who were made to play outside in certain instances. Gabe Davis, for whatever you want to say about him, he's going to give you some quality snaps to some degree on the outside, and he's going to give you a big presence out there. So
yeah, both of those guys, like they can lock down one area of the field outside the numbers. That would be very good for this team on both sides of the ball. For me, it's the offensive line. Like, can Morse be that stabilizing force in the middle? Can they stay healthy? Can Harrison take a step forward in year 2 where he becomes a plus player at right tackle? Like, if this group can be the 16th best offensive line in the league, that's great. Like that would make me feel so much better about where this offense is and where Trevor is and just every bit of like the ecosystem they're dealing with on that side of the ball.
that's so right, because what was it, 2 years ago? That's where they were. And the whole talking point with Trevor was like, okay, well, he has this average offensive line and he does so much in the pocket that he can kind of get more out of it than that. It's just that in 2023, it was so bad that he couldn't actually get it to that. So again, if they can get to average, they're good.
What counts as a successful season in your mind for the Jacksonville Jaguars?
It's like somehow make it to the playoffs. I don't know how they're going to do it. I don't know what the configuration is there. And then just Trevor in the offense getting to the point where we don't have to question if this guy was worth the money in the first overall pick. Like, we're just there.
I think that's exactly right. Trevor looks like a guy that should be making $55 million a year, and the offensive results are in line with that. And then you are in the mix for the division and pushing for a wild card, even if you're like one step down from Houston. The way that I'm thinking about this is you've been passed by. Like in the discourse and the conversation and the excitement level, you've been passed by not by one, but by two teams in your division at least this offseason. Can you show people by correcting the ship on offense specifically that that was wrong? That there is a justifiable level of excitement for the talent that you still have on this team, and that we should be considering you the same way we are with the Colts for one of those wild card spots because of what you can be with your young quarterback.
Right. Let's prove last year was an oopsie as opposed to, oh no, they're in a downward spiral.
We had two oopsie mentions with the Jags as well. The Jacksonville Jaguars, the 2023 Jaguars, oopsie. The 2024 Jaguars, it can't be worse.